Good day. I'm Dr. Ryan Zarychanski. I'm a critical care physician and hematologist from the University of Manitoba in Canada. I'm going to talk about the challenges of conducting clinical trials in a pandemic. I would absolutely like to thank the organizers of the conference for the invitation to record this presentation today. I hope that we can all get together as colleagues soon and interact with each other differently next year. My disclosures on the slide relate to grant funding for clinical trials of anticoagulants in COVID-19 disease. So we are conducting clinical trials. For this talk, though, we will review the process of developing and conducting clinical trials, discuss some of the challenges of conducting clinical trials in a pandemic, and present some solutions and provide some practical examples of these. And so, typically a lot is known before one starts a clinical trial. First of all, we understand the disease, the event rates, the incidence of whatever we're interested in, the biology in general. And we have some idea about a therapeutic target based on dose finding, phase 2 efficacy, safety, effect size, all that's good stuff. Then we develop a protocol with a patient population that we're presumed to know that is both at risk and remediable to the therapy we're studying. We know something about like the dose, the duration, the route that we want to give an agent. And again, all this relates to like sample size at the end of the day, so we conduct the trial appropriately. All that takes time, sometimes years. And then to develop a trial or to action a trial, there's a whole bunch of mundane things that need to occur slowly to get it right, like case report form development, statistical plans, modeling, DSMB and monitoring plans, adjudicating outcomes. And that is, they're essential, but again, boring. And then all the regulatory aspects are likewise important. Signing contracts takes 6 months often in my center, trial insurance, site training. But none of this can apply at the timeframes in a COVID world. And so what do we wait? What do we do while we're waiting? Funding is critical. And do we wait for the next funding call that may or may not occur when an urgent need for clinical trials exists? How do we select therapies when none have been really studied in this condition? And how do we adapt quickly to emerging evidence as trials report or safety data emerges? Will there be patients left when we complete all those steps? And of course, there isn't at many sites that started trials. So how do we finish as quickly and as strongly as we started? And how do we do this at warp speed without burning out? I can't answer all those questions, but I can. This talk is meant to provide some thoughts on them. So one of the facilitators of rapid clinical trials has been central funding models. So waiting for the grant funding to come out that you may or may not get was not a good strategy, and I saw that fail over and over again. And so central funding from a government model in the UK, particularly for a recovery trial or REMAP in that country, was a fantastic model of funding where clinical care was partnered with clinical trials, and all the resources went to well-established platforms. Whose Solidarity was kind of a spin on that without lots of funding from the beginning, and the funding models were a little bit more distributed, but there was a central organization to the trial which everyone could get behind. The REMAP trial, which I'll come back to a little bit, was a randomized embedded multi-platform adaptive platform trial that existed before COVID and was kind of started for a pandemic in some degree. But it was studying other domains and interventions, and it was ready to go and funded. So different models here where there's central funding, global organization, or existing funding that could switch over very quickly. And some of that blends itself into trial design elements. And so I talked about the multi-platform trial design, the platform design of REMAP, where it existed already and could be adapted by adding domains relevant to the pandemic. Bayesian adaptive platforms, I guess going from the end to the start here, features prominently right now in COVID research, because we're not sure of the effect sizes, the sample size that we would need. And so based on information that accrues, we can monitor and stop the trial or an arm appropriately based on emerging information. Of course, that's not what recovery or solidarity is doing. And so you can still adapt and run a trial in sort of a frequentist approach, but it takes it's harder to wrap one's head around how exactly that does, in a sense that more expert advice and monitoring is needed along the way. And so I think adaptations is the key, though. Some of the other facilitating features of trials in a pandemic have been the idea of verbal consent as opposed to the standard written consent that is just not practical, where you're switching documents and lots of handovers of paper, lots of co-enrollment, mimicking practices of care and uncertainty, and open label designs, again, to facilitate trials in places with stretched resources, reducing patient exposures to staff. Large, simple trials repurposing existing therapies is where we started from in the groups that I participate with, but that is in parallel to vaccine development, which is not large nor simple from the beginning, but they can exist together. But widespread collaboration and the need for it cannot be understated enough, for sure. The idea of making a learning health system out of this and incorporating clinical trials as part of standard of care, where in the face of absolute uncertainty as to what to do with this patient other than provide supportive care, why not make clinical trials part of that care, so you can not only make a decision for this patient that you can justify as part of a clinical trial, but then that experience will inform the next patient and the next patient as part of trials that report and come out to practice. Open access reporting has been facilitatory. The adoption of large group authorship policies for buy-in and recognition, again, is worth stating because it is important. There's this unfortunate aspect of politics in this, particularly for large influential world leaders who say that a certain drug works and must be adopted, has control over some regulatory agencies as well. And that's unfortunate because it impedes science and, in fact, can hurt patients in the end. We saw this with hydroxychloroquine. We're kind of seeing this with early adoption of convalescent plasma without real strong data. Observational studies that have been kind of sensational, salacious at times, published in high-impact journals irresponsibly, has also hurt the scientific process. And I hope we've learned lessons from that in this pandemic. Don't discount the impact of fear from physicians and patients, politicians and egos, and how that can impact clinical trials. Recovery is a great example of success. I want to come back to centrally funded, large, simple trial, actually frequentist in its design. Studying, reporting has been slower than the press releases in a sense, but 12,000 patients reported, 176 centers, really robust data to adopt dexamethasone, not yet published, but well described in lay press and bulletins that have been important to dampen or snuff out enthusiasm to study hydroxychloroquine or Kaletra further. And so what a great example of a trial that just did it well. And I can't praise it enough at this time. This WHO Solidarity trial, slightly different in its organizational approach, but one that has been instrumental in getting the world behind different therapies, most antiviral therapies. I mentioned REMAP, the International Based Adaptive Trial. My own trial that I lead called ATTACK, which is an anticoagulation trial with Ewan Gallagher and Patrick Lawler, has now merged with REMAP and the NIH group called Active4 to study like a global strategy, one harmonized trial to studying anticoagulation in COVID-19. So therapeutic versus usual care, unification of these three anticoagulation trial platforms, one harmonized protocol, one DSMC, one trial, a multi-platform RCT. I think that's an example of the kind of collaboration that's been required to make this happen. So we have enough patients, finish strongly, inform the current pandemic, as opposed to what's on the slide, which is a lot of fragmented small anticoagulation trials that didn't merge into larger ones that won't finish strongly for the most part. I can't speak to every one of them, but I can speak to many of them that have like run out of funding, don't have the patients in their country or site. And so, in summary, informative RCTs should and absolutely can be launched in the pandemic. It requires authentic global collaboration. We have to put politics and ego aside to come together around a structure that allows us to succeed globally. Central funding, the use of existing networks and platforms, or like REMAP, like for instance, or countries and sites that have the infrastructure that can get around one or two or three domains or arms like recovery has shown us. Incorporating clinical trials into routine care, highly valued. The use of adaptive trials in general, embracing co-enrollment, and repurposing existing drugs at the start of this while more specific ones come out or are developed. Again, I'd like to thank the organizers of the conference for inviting me. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me at the email provided on the slide.